Hello there, you're watching Context, where we throw an inquisitive glance at some key developments across the globe. Georgia, a country in the South Caucasus, is unlikely to join the European Union and NATO anytime soon. Yet officials from this country have increasingly been vocal about the necessity of having a clearer picture as to whether the country's partners in the Western world are willing to address its specific challenges. In the meantime, officially, Tbilisi, despite its presently strained relations with Brussels and Strasbourg, appears to continue diplomatic efforts to secure what one may call a stronger foothold in Euro-Atlantic institutions, insisting on a fair and consistent approach from both the European Union and NATO. In a recent visit to Bucharest, Nicholas Samharadze, chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, emphasized the importance of recognizing Georgia's unique geopolitical challenges and ensuring an unbiased evaluation of its integration process. And back in February of this year, Georgian Prime Minister Irakli Kobakhidze called on the European Union to adopt a more flexible approach in membership talks, saying that the bloc's bureaucracy poses significant challenges to Georgia's accession process. What is the road ahead for Georgia? That's the central question to be asked and preferably answered to. Could it potentially consider regional security alliances in order to meet growing challenges of our time? What are the sensibilities involved in this region, in the South Caucasus? To answer and discuss these questions, joining me now live is Professor George Micheleshvili from the European University, Tbilisi, Georgia. Welcome to Context, Professor.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. So let's be very clear about this subject. We all understand that, I suppose everybody in his right mind understands that Georgia is not going to join the EU and NATO anytime soon. But for us to be able to understand what Georgia's current genuine aspirations are, let's try to find an answer to the following question. What Georgia, in the ideal world, could have actually achieved in terms of its cooperation with NATO by now?
Okay, in the first place, that's a very optimistic question, mentioning ideal world. We're very far from that. And I guess for some time we will have to use in a very imperfect setting, very fraught, very dangerous. And you know, as every single state, the very first goal is survival, it's physical survival. Then it is prosperity and, of course, democratic governance, good governance. Well, sometimes when these goals go hand in hand, it's wonderful. This is close to ideal world for one particular country. Sometimes, unfortunately, there are conflicts. And, well, the decision of the Georgian leaderships are, well, I would say kind of they have a mixed record. Sometimes they are wise, sometimes they are well thought out, sometimes they are less so. Well, in this case, I would partially agree with the members of the Georgian leadership, which mentioned the fact that the certain policies of European bureaucracy are wanting. I think it will be far more productive if the criticism is limited to the areas when it is really due. There are areas when they are really due, and not mentioned, for instance, I think that absolutely unjudicious and like far-fetched demand, like for instance, to release the former president of Georgia, as citing it as a lack of democratic deficit. As far as the prospect of joining NATO and European Union is concerned, we see that these organizations are in no rush to expand in any observable future. So right now we are witnessing a very serious ramping up of defense spending on the part of European Union. Maybe in a few, years, short years and maybe single-digit years, European Union will transform into the fully fledged, genuine geopolitical entity, and then there will be different worlds because the neighborhood will be different, and the role and the functions and the policies of the countries like Georgia will also adjust to this world. So, but in this, and currently I believe that both sides, Georgia and the European bureaucracy, need to mend fences. There should be a political will to restore ties and make sure that the criticism toward Georgia is fair. There is, believe me, significant areas where the criticism is due, but sometimes it is, really unsubstantiated.
So we shouldn't take for granted that everything levied against Georgia actually reflects the reality, but there are certain chunks of that criticism that you think that actually conforms to reality. And you talked about the new world. How is Georgia preparing for that new world? And what is the road ahead for Georgia? And also, perhaps, I'm asking many questions in one go, but still, what does drive the current incumbent government in Georgia? Because the Prime Minister Kobachidze, the President, and some other officials, they've been talking about the need for clarity on the side of NATO and European Union.
Well, the clarity is, for instance, for a few months, Georgia had been criticized for rigging the election. Well, I can admit, so as a Georgian citizen, obviously there was some tweaking, there was some tinkering, but, well, calling it as a massive fraud was probably an overstatement. About a week ago, we saw some change in mode, at least actually in actions, when the US ambassador met with the Georgian foreign minister. Something would be unimaginable even a month ago, because the main narrative though, on the part of the United States was that the elections was rigged, that the government is and the leadership is illegitimate. Now it seems that there are talks. Well, it remains to be seen, so how Georgia will fare in the new administration. I think many will hinge on that. Yes, we see the attempt on the part of the European Union to achieve this geopolitical autonomy and the true, genuine financial independence, particularly in terms of security. But we still understand that it is the United States that calls the shot. It is United States when these keys for the statehood and the security of the countries are. Obviously, there are many questions and raised brows when it comes to the actions of the new administration of the United States. But I believe that clarity will be there soon, and it will also, I think, many things, many outstanding issues will fall into their place when there is when the policy on of the United States towards South Caucasus and Georgia in particular is in place.
And talking about taking necessary action today in order to be able to meet the challenges of tomorrow, I would like to zoom in on our wider regions, on our region, actually, South Caucasus. On Caucasus now, we talked about Azerbaijan's foreign policy. We talked about equidistance employed by Azerbaijan. I think one of the Azerbaijani commentators made a very interesting point, saying that Azerbaijan has always been sort of equidistant from major power centers. With Armenia, Armenia has been, for some considerable time, prior to Prime Minister Pashinyan's ascendance to power, had been pursuing the policy of closely integrating into the Russia-dominated organizations, namely Collective Security Treaty Organization, Eurasian Economic Union. Now the impression given is that Armenia wants to somewhat extricate itself from those organizations, whereas in the case of Georgia it was quite the reverse. Georgia, from the very beginning, at least from early 2000s, has been probably not from early to, I would say from 2003 onwards, has been pursuing the policy of European integration with NATO element, European Union elements being clearly entrenched in the official policy rhetoric. And now looks like Georgia also wants to somewhat extricate itself from those commitments and to be more balanced. How does that, this whole picture look like to you? And to what extent are you saying that? Not fully perhaps, but Azerbaijan's equidistance policy could be replicated by some other actors in this region?
Well, so I believe in this particular regard, Azerbaijan policy seems to be vindicated for now, because they never put all eggs in one basket. So we see it's very clear pronounced in Armenia. They put all their eggs in the security basket with Russia. Well, now they feel betrayed. Actually, I don't understand why, but still, that's actually the perception. And they made a very sharp turn towards the West. So now they put all the eggs in the other basket. So being equidistant is understandable, and it is particularly understandable in case of Azerbaijan. So when I interact with my friend, with my colleagues, I see that they have more than sufficient reasons to be very unhappy with Russia in the first place, which helped Armenia to compromise Azerbaijani territorial integrity in 1993-94, and also the West. For instance, like this 907 amendment of the US Congress and some other policies, whereby they were either kicking the bucket, kicking the can, or they were simply prolonging the situation whereby Azerbaijani territories were occupied. We have seen the lack of the genuine support on the part of the Western institution. This is understandable. Azerbaijan is very discontent with both. Well, now it looks like Georgia and Armenia tend to take a sharper turn. In case of Georgia, so I believe, given that Russian perfidies are responsive for massive human life losses and abuses of being territorial integrity and being internally displaced people, well, true rapprochement with Russia is unimaginable. But distancing with the West without actually finding any other, I would say, actor, any other security guarantor will be very difficult. That's why my personal desire is that the ties between Georgia and the Western institutions, European Union in the first place, are mended sooner rather than later. I think that there is enough common ground, enough common goals, and enough cases for the West to have strong Georgia and for Georgia to have the well-functioning European Union in order to mend these ties.
Georgian officials are saying that European institutions, Brussels, Strasbourg, and others, they're not sufficiently appreciative of the intricacy and of the geopolitical challenge faced by Georgia. And we earlier talked about Turkey. Azerbaijan is not a member of NATO, has absolutely no ambition of joining NATO anytime soon, at least at any rate officially. But Azerbaijan has an alliance with Turkey, formalized by virtue of the Shusha Declaration signed in June 2021, and this declaration was later ratified by both parliaments. It's an international legal treaty. So the question here is that some analysts, including Vladimir Soko of Jamestown Foundation, opine that although Azerbaijan is a member of NATO, it has some form of indirect NATO protection by virtue of having this allied interaction, allied relationship with Turkey. Do you think something of this kind could be contemplated in the context of Georgia-Turkey relations?
I believe that, well, of course, there is a significant, I would say, affinity, so ethnic, historic, like between Azerbaijan and Turkey. That's why these ties are special. And Shusha Declaration is basically the military political union between the two countries. So I believe that certain tripartite agreement among Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Turkey is possible. Maybe it will not be as far-reaching as the Shusha Declaration, but our three countries have had the experience of working together, creating these transport corridors, like energy corridors, which ensured their independence in the first place from Russia. So therefore, I think that actually our countries have, well, by the way, our defense ministers meet periodically. I think that they have a significant experience and trust among themselves in order to pursue these ties. On the other hand, so Georgia enjoys friendly relations with Armenia. So on political level, even personal level, and actually a recent football game between the two countries showed.
Congratulations,
so therefore, Georgia potentially can be unified. As far as this Turkey is concerned, we see that today European Union needs Turkey as a key part of its new security architecture. So they try to ramp up their military spending, but they don't have ready resources. It will take time. So Turkey is ready to be part of this new architecture, being the second largest NATO army, and the country which has a hands-on experience because its own challenges with the Kurdish minority. So I believe that there is potential in this particular regard. As far as Georgia's, I would say, complaints and discontent towards the European bureaucracy is concerned, it is partially, I would repeat, it is partially warranted. So because, for instance, when Georgia took a circumspect and muted support, well, I wouldn't say muted support, it was genuine political support for Ukraine, but it was short of sanctioning Russia and joining the militarily the forces with Ukraine, which would open which would incur Russian wrath, which would be very damaging for the Georgian statehood. I believe that in this particular regard, better understanding on the part of European institutions is possible.
And Professor, my last question to you. We earlier talked about the prospective Ukraine-Russia deal and Russia being subsequently more proactive in this region in the South Caucasus. It has always been very active, but being even more active after the ceasefire in Ukraine. What is the likelihood of Georgia being pulled into Russia-dominated integration models in view of the likelihood of Russia, as I said earlier, being more proactive after the ceasefire in Ukraine?
Well, of course, that scenario, for me personally, and the majority of Georgians will be a bad scenario because, about 80% of Georgians support European integration. Maybe not all of these 80% understand what it implies, what it means. They just like the very the soundbite of being actually part of the European Union, without these attendant responsibilities and like political culture, which is like sort of lacking in Georgia. So obviously, kind of strengthening Russia in the South Caucasus is a bad news for Georgian. Well, as a Georgian citizen, I can attest to it, particularly with the experience of 2008 war and the conflicts of the 90s, which Russia was stoking. So that would be obviously a bad news, but I hope that this reality will not materialize. Like I think Russia, being bogged down in Ukraine, now will have less of a will to, okay, to be a spoiler elsewhere, but of course it can be. Well, the other calculation might be that they want to compensate with for the incomplete victory in Ukraine elsewhere, and South Caucasus comes as a so target all the more since because for all the political support, for all the wonderful statement of the Western partners towards South Caucasus, when push comes to show, well, there is a big doubt that they will help South Caucasus in a genuine way. The only counterweight, and we saw it in 2020, 2023, to the Russian influence so far has been Turkey. It was Turkey which helped Azerbaijan, well, of course, supported Azerbaijan in its endeavor to restore its territorial integrity to a considerable extent in 2020 and then completely 2023. So there is also possibility that with its political support, with its projection of power, Turkey, and by extension, kind of like the West in tow, will will make sure that the like Russian influence and the Russian presence in the South Caucasus is not overwhelming.
Professor George Michalishvili, I'm so grateful to you for your time. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Have a good day.
You too. Well, this was Professor George Michalishvili from the European University of Tbilisi, Georgia. Indeed, there is no universal panacea to geopolitical challenges faced by countries on the continental fault line. There are some constraints as to whether Azerbaijan's foreign policy approach, described as equidistance, for all its perceived success, can be effectively put into practice by Georgia and some other countries. Yet what seems to be the case is that the change the region must, and one who leads that change will be one shaping the region's future together with others, of course. I'm Orkhan Amashov. Stay informed, stay enlightened, and see you very soon indeed, hopefully.